Greetings friends, welcome to Typology Gifts. I'm doing a little video here because I had to remove a video from my channel because the person who I typed believed that MBTI had connection to the occult. And I will do a separate video on the connections between MBTI and the occult, but I will just go ahead and spoil it for you right now. No, MBTI is not connected to the occult in any kind of practical sense, although you can go back and draw connections between where some of the ideas that Carl Jung had have relationships to occult symbology and things like that. But I'm going to break that down in a future video. I thought this video would be a good one to talk about that's sort of related, but how seriously should you take MBTI? Should it influence major decisions in your life, or should it just be something for fun, or is it somewhere in between? Well, that's what this video is to talk about, so let's jump right in. So first of all, let's ask ourselves this question. What is evidence? How do you define evidence? Well, the definitions that I found online that I thought were pretty good: observation, measurement, and reasoning confirmed by independent observers. I actually got that definition from our friend Isaac Asimov, a great thinker of the last century, science fiction writer. He said, "I believe in evidence. I believe in observation, measurement, and reasoning confirmed by independent observers. I'll believe anything, no matter how wild and ridiculous, if there is evidence for it. The wilder and more ridiculous something is, however, the firmer and more solid the evidence will have to be." So, in other words, great claims require great evidence. You can say something strange like quantum theory is supported by the evidence, and it is very unusual if you look into it, but there are labs around the world that are working on it and that have gathered a lot of evidence that indicates that quantum theory is a real thing. And now that they're creating quantum computers and quantum internet based on the reality of quantum theory. So if quantum theory was not valid, we wouldn't be able to build things on it. So it is supported by the evidence so far. So what does weak evidence look like? Well, it's mostly based on pattern recognition of personal experience, tribal knowledge, theology, misinformation, disinformation. It's highly interpretive with few checks and balances. So if you hear someone put forth an idea and there's no way to check that, there's no way to gather evidence or evaluate it or prove whether it's true, and you're only hearing people supporting that point of view from within that circle and not from any independent third party, then you can probably think that that's weak evidence. So what about strong evidence? Well, it's mostly based on the pattern recognition of observable data and experimentation. It is also interpretive, that's true, but there are checks and balances on that interpretation. Ultimately, everything is up to human interpretation, but the whole point of evidence is that there are checks and balances to try to validate whether or not this thing is actually true. So with that in mind, I've conceptualized a spectrum of evidence, things that have weak evidence, things that have strong evidence, and I'm going to go through what I think is on that spectrum. Again, this is my own personal opinion, so you can object to it. I know some of these things you might hold strongly to, you might have strong beliefs about them, and that's fine, and I'm not saying you are invalid or that your point of view is invalid. I'm just saying there's strong evidence for some things, there's weak evidence for other things. So let's take a look at what that spectrum looks like. And I'm going to move this, I'm going to move me over here. Alright, let's take a look at the weak evidence first. So on the far left-hand side, I've put human intuition there, because ultimately you can have the strongest intuition about something, but that doesn't mean that you actually have any evidence that it's true. And a lot of people have, over the course of history, have had intuition about things such as the universe revolves around the earth, the sun revolves around the earth, bleeding people can cause cures to diseases, and so on and so on. There's been many intuition-driven beliefs that we've had, and then evidence has come along that those things were not true, and those intuitions were proven invalid. One step above human intuition, I've got kind of a category of things here that I would say the evidence is scrupulous at best. If you take things like state-sanctioned propaganda, or propaganda put forth by certain organizations, political organizations, or even religious organizations, sometimes there's a kernel of truth in it, but by and large, it's usually unsupported by the evidence. Same thing with fake news, right-wing, left-wing fake news. You can find it a lot. It's to me, it's easy to spot, but I know it's not so easy for other people. But you can tell kind of by the lack of independent third-party analysis of whether something is true. Looking at video footage from multiple angles or sources, reading information from people or groups that you agree with and that you disagree with, and trying to suss out what the truth of the matter really is, things like that. These are all ways to find your way to the truth when you're looking at fake news. Paranormal psychology, you might have seen Ghostbusters, I would put that into the very, very low or weak evidence category. Most conspiracy theories, that's not to say that there aren't conspiracies. Of course, if you know about Edward Snowden and the things that he's discovered, these were things that were probably considered conspiracy theories before that, but then he's revealed through his leaks that sure enough, these things weren't just theories, these were real, legitimate spying on Americans that have been going on. So I wouldn't say all conspiracy theories have weak evidence, but I would say the vast majority of them do, and I think that's what their appeal is that there's so much imagination required and a sense of exclusivity that you have the truth or something. And I'd throw newspaper astrology kind of into this same category. It's really up to the individual reading it to decide whether or not that evidence or that astrological information fits their life, but it's been proven that you can take broadly generalized statements and people will accept them as unique. One step up from that, I would put things like holy books. So this would be, now I know this is going to get some hate, and I'm sorry, but the reason I would put holy books into the weak evidence category is, generally speaking, the proponents of holy books are the adherents of those holy books. So it doesn't stand up to external third-party definition of evidence because there's a unique point of view that's held by those adherents of that holy book, and they can't necessarily prove all of the things that are in that holy book, and that's why I would say it's weak evidence. Looking into tea leaves to try to determine the future, put that in the same bucket. Organized religion in general, there may or may not be, there usually is a holy book related, but just in general, organized religion, it kind of thrives based on misinformation, disinformation, and it kind of tries to strike down any opposing evidence because that would take away their power. The occult, there's some people that swear that things in the occult are real, and perhaps maybe there are some aspects of it that can be proven by evidence, but I think by and large it's not really very well supported by the evidence. Same thing with like tarot card reading, Sirius astrology. They have some degree of evidence. Like you can look at the effects of pareidolia, which is pattern recognition. You can look at the intuition of people doing the astrological readings or the tarot card readings. But at the end of the day, is there enough evidence that something supernatural is happening, or does the evidence seem to imply that there's more of a psychological effect going on? So one step up from that, I would put online personality tests the 4-color personalities, ink blot tests, the Rorschach tests, things that require a high degree of interpretation and are highly subjective, but have perhaps marginally more evidence behind them, albeit still rather slim. And you can see only a step higher than that do we have more widely accepted, personality theories such as socionics, Enneagram, MBTI, and so on. And you'll notice that these things are on the weak evidence side of things, but a little more towards the middle. There are things we can observe. I wouldn't be able to type people with some degree of accuracy if there wasn't some level of truth behind cognitive functions and things like that. It would just be completely random occurrence, but if you've watched enough of my videos, you've probably seen that there definitely are certain types of people and that have certain types of personality preferences. So I think it is some level of legitimate, but it's not even anywhere close to what we need to be considered fully evidence-based field. And I'm interested in typology because I think that maybe with more work and maybe with more research we can come to a more evidence-based understanding of it. I haven't discovered what that theory is yet to get to the more evidence-based understanding of personality, but certainly something a lot of people are working on and a lot of people are thinking about, so that's my curiosity and interest in it. So let's take a look at things that have more evidence. A little bit past the halfway mark, but more on the side of evidence. You have things like search engines and wikis, which do have a lot of true information in them. However, you do have to fact check a lot of things. You do have to do your homework and check your sources and make sure that everything is legitimately true. It's not like going to a wiki or a search engine is absolutely going to give you the truth, but there is certainly a lot there to find your way to the truth. There are a lot of links to the evidence, so that's why I would put it more on the side of stronger evidence. And then you get further in, you get the religious studies, the field of philosophy. So these are like these meta-analysis of things like religion or of philosophy of humanity, points of view. And while they're harder to solidly prove a lot of these theories, they are sort of built on observation and built on studies and rationalizations, and there are ways to attempt to prove or disprove differing theories, but I wouldn't put it as strongly as some of these other ones that we're going to look at. So the next step up, I have Ocean, the Big Five, which is openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And then the field of user experience, which I'm in the field of user experience. I put those two things in the same kind of column because they are more experimentation driven and more accepted in the scientific community, kind of as being more evidence driven, more logical way of seeing things. But I would say that they're still not at the level of scientific rigor that you would see further on the right. There's still a degree of subjectivity to these things. So as usual, everything, even all the way up to the far right on strong evidence, everything requires some level of interpretation. So the question is, how falsifiable is it? Can you involve third parties to validate whether something has sufficient evidence? So the next one up would be the field of psychology. There's now a lot of evidence behind many different psychological effects, and there's been a lot of lab testing behind different psychological effects and field testing. You can find lots of papers, you can find lots of research. It still requires a lot of interpretation, but there's a lot there that you can find now that you can look up and find evidence that this phenomenon is true or that phenomenon is true. And then finally, the gold standard peer review, although people would say, well, the peer review process nowadays has been corrupted, I would say, well, broadly speaking, peer review is the gold standard. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it hasn't been corrupted or that there hasn't been problems with peer review, because there have. But generally speaking, if you get a group of experts together to analyze the findings of a team who has done research, and they can validate whether the findings do follow, that the results do follow the evidence, then they can sign off on that to a degree and use that in their own research, and it just gets further proven based on, further studies. Other things like EEG readings, you have like real literal readings from a medical device that's checking brain waves. You're able to see, I would lump any other kind of like body recording devices, echocardiogram and things like that. Anything that can read body outputs still requires interpretation, obviously, but it is a hard output. It's something that is being created based on real, observable things in the real world. Lastly, I have the field of medicine here. I know that's pretty broad, but generally speaking, the field of medicine, it demands evidence for how things work. That's why there are trials. Things have to get tried out in many cases on animals. They have to get tried out in studies on humans, and things just aren't released out into the wild by the medical community into the medical community without a significant amount of evidence that it does work. So that's the spectrum there that I see as far as low evidence to high evidence. And with that in mind, how seriously should you take MBTI? I'd say you can take it as seriously as I do, which is to create a gift recommendation website and use it to help people improve their lives. But you probably shouldn't take it as seriously as any of the things that you can see on the right, where there's a preponderance of evidence. It's very easy to collect evidence, or I say easy, but I mean like it's easier to collect evidence. And it's something that a lot of third parties would look at the evidence you've gathered and evaluate it and say that this is legitimate evidence. Anything on the left-hand side, you're going to have a harder time getting third parties to evaluate the evidence and come to a conclusiveness. You might say, well, why is religion over on the weak evidence side? I'm religious. I mean, I'm not, but let's just say you're saying that. I grew, by the way, I grew up religious. I grew up for 30 of my 40 years. I was religious. It's not necessarily a slam on religion, but just to say that my observation, having been in it, is that it abounds on the preponderance of weak evidence. If evidence to the contrary is presented, that's summarily rejected, immediately rejected, or justified away, and instead of evaluated and thought through. So I think if somebody is religious and is willing to be open-minded to the critical evidence of their religion, and they're willing to go wherever the evidence tells them, my thinking is that they probably won't be religious very much longer. So, and I think if you are a believer in a religion, you probably have to acknowledge that one of the core tenets of that religion is that you have to accept it based on faith. And what is faith but a lack of evidence? So I think it fits. I think it would fit by even the definitions that religious people would have. I don't think they would be able to say that holy books have the same high level of rigorous evidence behind them that the field of medicine has, for example. I don't think they would be able to reasonably say that. So when it comes to things like MBTI, don't take it too seriously. That's how I'll say it. Just enjoy, have fun, and use it to improve your life. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like if you enjoyed this video. Please leave comments if you disagreed with me in the comments. Don't just hit that dislike button. Come in the comments and talk to me, and let's have a discussion. And if you thought I stimulated your thinking on this, then give it a like, or don't do anything at all and just leave me a comment and let's talk about it. So thanks a lot, and have a good rest of your day.